Hi, everybody. I'd like to introduce you to Lisa Donatello-Rebek, who's a very talented Vedic astrologer from Pennsylvania.
No, no, I'm from Italy, and I
Italy, all right, Italy, from Italy. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Lalitha, and what your background in astrology is and how you got involved in astrology.
Hi Gary, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited. This is so exciting that we're going to interview each other. And I guess you said we are talking about techniques that are not in the books, or at least they are not always in the books, in the texts, right? In the classical texts.
Yep, yep.
So let me tell you a little bit about myself. I am from Italy, born and raised and educated there. I went to university in Milan. And then I moved to, when I married my husband, I moved to the US, and he's American. And I had very normal jobs. I worked for the Italian consulate in Chicago. And then I worked in public relations. I was an executive and I was very stressed. So I took up yoga. And I remember the first day I took yoga, I was on a vacation with my children in Florida. And I walked into this beautiful store. It was a new age store, I think. It's a crystal store. It's a really lovely place. The whole neighborhood was pretty. So I was very attracted to this store. And I walked in and I went to a shelf without knowing where to go whatsoever. And I took a book. It almost fell off the shelf. It didn't literally fall, but I grabbed this book, nothing else. And it was Autobiography of a Yogi.
Oh,
And
yes.
started me on this beautiful spiritual path in 1993. But when I was 18, this was so destined. When I was 18, a nun in my school gave me a book, a little book of Tagore poem. So I really fell in love with Tagore, and it didn't sound anything like the literature I was studying in college. Uh, and then I went to India in my late teens. I was almost 20, and I had my first astrology consultation. I was so stunned, and this man in the hotel knew everything about me. I was writing short stories, but I didn't publish them. I was so afraid of my parents because they were famous. My mother was a famous journalist, my
Oh,
father, author, and they were well known in Italy, at least in their fields or in their circles. And I didn't want them to read these stories. So I never told anyone. And this astrologer knew, you're writing short stories. He told me things about my childhood and about my future, and everything came true. So of course, now I was very intrigued, right? I
yes.
love astrology. Yeah. And there's something when it touches, it's like it touches us. It, it kind of inspires you to go deeper, right? So I was
Yes.
studying Western astrology and it wasn't really working. I invented my own numerology system, and that gave me better insights into the future and things and predictions. But then I wanted to really see what Indian astrology was all about. I didn't know the term Vedic, and it turned out I had all these books I had bought, but I was afraid of studying on my own. And then it's a long story. When my children went to college, both of them, I went to India. I spent 6 months and began studying. I already knew Ayurveda. I was practicing and I was a consultant, but I studied, that was 2000. I started in 2007, but I never got serious into Vedic astrology until about 2010. And then, so I started practicing. I even had clients. I don't know what I was doing, but I think I was doing okay because people loved it. And then I took a proper course with Sam Jetpi in his Vedic, American Vedic Academy of Art and Science. And then I got the first degree, and then I got my bachelor degree in Vedic Sciences. And that's it. And then I wrote a book about the astrological houses. So I'm so passionate, and I knew I would be studying my whole life, and that's barely enough. So that's pretty much, I went all around the world, right?
Excellent.
India,
Excellent.
Florida, and then New York. Yeah.
You know that's a fantastic background. If i- i- in in terms of how you approach a chart, I know you're a strong believer in remedial measures, and so am I. That's what drew me into astrology. Can you explain to the folks out there how remedial measures work and how they and your experiences with them?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I find that before I begin reading a birth chart, I need to do something to ground myself spiritually. So of course I pray to my guru, and then maybe Sri Brigu, and then of first Ganesha. I always start with Ganesha, no matter what I do.
Yeah,
I have little statues everywhere, and I do a puja. I don't know if it's proper puja, but it's what Dr. Pillai, my teacher, taught us. So I find that as I'm doing this and I'm praying and I just ask for insights, and so I can help with this person. And so the spirit is definitely a spirit of service, how I can help with this person, change their lives around. And I notice sometimes omens, like for example, once I realized it was the Rahu Kala this person had signed up for, and I thought, oh, so I prayed to Goddess Durga and all these rituals, and then I thought, I bet this person is in the Rahu Mahadasha, and of course, yes. Another time there was a question about a woman wouldn't tell me the questions, and I knew this person, but she was a returning client. And I just was doing my puja and I saw a picture of a deity with two wives. And, I thought, oh, there might be some problem with infidelity or somebody else, something like that. And sure enough, she was upset because she felt her marriage was over. Her husband had somebody else. So I felt bad.
yeah,
Definitely, the omens tell you a lot to begin with, but I'm not a psychic. I use the proper scientific method of Vedic astrology. So the usual, you look at all the ascendants and then the divisional charts. So, but the omens really have made a big impact. I noticed this Vedic astrologer from India, her name is Vijaya Lakshmi. She's on the Astroved astrology panel there. Um, Her name is, so she said to me once, the chart is correct and maybe you get 75 to 80% usually. That's how it works. But you'll see that the omens are 100% correct. And that's been my experience actually. And so that's the spirit, definitely a spirit of service and how I can fix these problems this person is having and how I can make their life better. How can, even make dreams come true. That's my specialty actually. I have this, this passion for doing that, yeah.
okay. And I think I think one of the things I admire about you is you tell people that you open possibilities for people because a lot of Vedic astrologers, and this was what really sort of it didn't alienate me, but it upset me about a lot of them. They would just say, "No, you will never do this," and not everyone said that, but a lot of Vedic astrologers I ran to said this,
In
and
India.
and I'm a firm believer in all possibilities. You know,
Yes, absolutely. And that's what I learned from my first formal teacher, who was Deepak Chopra, and then also from Dr. Pillai. So for the last 15 years, I've been studying only with Dr. Pillai. And before that, there was Amachi, and then Deepak Chopra formally for a few years. And then there was Sri Ravi Shankar for a short period of
oh
time.
yes, okay,
It was amazing. But Dr. Pillai is a different level to me because I love the Siddhas. So I totally fell in love with that tradition. And then Paramahansa Yogananda talks about them, the Siddhas, the Tamil Siddhas, right? So I find that they have another level. So that's probably what has made me different from other astrologers, that I also I'm using the Siddha method. So all those secrets of the devas and those particular techniques that are not, for example, in the Parashara, the Brihat Parashara or Shastra, or in the all the other texts like, Jataka Parijata and all that.
Yeah.
So I find that it's an added. My teacher gave me also a book. Dr. Pillai gave me a book, and that also I find that is so different from what's commonly used. So I like to integrate with that a lot.
Yeah.
So
All right, go on.
No, you want to hear about you more. I'm fascinated. I know you're a scholar and you have a PhD, right?
Yes.
Not-
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about you and how you got started.
Well, I think mine actually isn't all that interesting a story, but the timing, I think the timing of it is. So I was mildly interested in things like tarot and weird phenomena when I was a kid, when I was a young kid, and I was interested in Western astrology when I was young, when I was maybe around 10 years old. But I never pursued it as a formal course of study. And as a matter of fact, I tried tarot for a little while. I know how to do it now, but at that time I found it kind of depressing. Uh, and, 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 and so I started moving a little bit more towards Buddhistic studies and things like that. But
Your
yeah,
intuition.
yeah, but that was Saturn Mahadasha, so Saturn's more like it's more like it's more like see the work and do the work. It's not really as a matter of fact, one of my favorite stories from D.T. Suzuki, the man who brought Zen Buddhism to the United States, is he has a conversation between a Zen Buddhist monk and a siddha, and the siddha floats over the stream, and the Zen monk comes over and says, "No, you're doing it wrong." Slaps him and makes him walk across the stream. So instead of floating, I had a very my background is extraordinarily grounded. I have an MBA I have a bachelor's in sociology, a master's in business administration, which is fairly common. It's not all that unusual to have that in the generation I grew up in. And I was going to go to law school. And I got married. That kind of killed law school, but the marriage didn't last. And shortly after the marriage fell apart, and when I realized I couldn't solve everything by myself, I started taking Transcendental Meditation. And within about
Maharishi Mahesh Yogi.
Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, and within about a month after that, they said, we're going to have an astrologer from India come and do readings for people. And that was when I said, okay, well, I'm going to find out what this is about. And I said, gemstones, what the heck are they going to do? So essentially, when I had the reading, I had the same experience she did, but this was in my 30s. And essentially, this guy, and it was a very perfunctory reading. It really wasn't a very detailed reading, but this guy nailed me in a way that a Western astrology reading never had.
Oh, yes.
And I had never had that many Western astrology readings, to be honest. But I said, if there's a possible way I can learn this, I'll have to learn it. It was right on the cusp of my Saturn, the end of my Saturn Mahadasha, at the beginning of my Mercury Mahadasha.
Oh, perfect.
And my Mercury's in Virgo in the 12th house in my chart. So I don't mind. Yeah. So essentially, I took the training with them. I did the gemstones, and then I sort of broke away from them, not because they were doing anything wrong, but because as soon as people start telling me I can't do something, I find out ways to do it. And they said, well, in order to become an astrologer, you have to do 100 charts. So I said, well, I'll do 100 charts then. So I sat down, and what little knowledge I had, I did like 60 charts, and then I started reading the classical text myself. I started reading Parashara, the Paladipika, Jataka Parijata, and then when I went down to one of the Vedic Astrology conferences in 1994, I started talking, and I was saying, yeah, but don't you know about it? Characarakas or changeable indicators and all this other stuff. And Mr. Rao had just, K.M. Rao had just come over to the United States around that time, starting to actually discuss Javanese astrology and the changeable indicators and all that other stuff. But people came up to me and said, you seem to know quite a bit, and I'd only been doing it for like around 2 or 3 years, so it was perhaps one of those things was like a past life reawakening or something like that. And I did study with Mr. Rao. I did study with Mr. Rao and Dr. Chirag. And Mr. Rao actually, he gave out these palm leaves of recognition to people from Bharat Vidya Bhavan, and there were maybe a half a dozen of us who got them. And I, as we're in astrology, we've only been working for about 5 or 6 years, got one of these.
Yay. And you started with a bang.
Yes. And also I managed to link very strongly. I met Dr. Chopra, by the way, in 1990, and Dr. Nader actually did my pulse diagnosis, the fellow who's in charge of TM, or was in charge of TM after Maharishi attained samadhi, attained final liberation. And then I met some of the South Indian priests, some of the Tamil priests at a temple in Ashland, Massachusetts. They were in fact linked with the father was the head of the South Indian priests Association. The father of these fellows was the head of the South Indian Priests Association, and he would go around installing temples around the world.
Perfect.
So I had a lot of like very strong connections pretty early on, and
I really
So that's, I think that may be one of the reasons that even though some of the techniques I use may not be classical, if you look through certain of the texts, they actually are there. So let's say Astro Cartography as we use it right now wasn't in the classical text. So that's true. And there's another form of Astro Cartography that's used in India. But I can remember going into things like C.S. Patel, who I consider to be like my last true teacher. He was C.S. Patel. He was a great astrologer. He actually did a translation or helped Arshanthanam with a translation of the Chandra Kalanadi of the Deva Karal, which is an incredibly confusing 3-volume book set. And well, the Chandra Kalanadi is a South Indian text, and I also got introduced to the Lalitha techniques pretty early on as well. So the Lalitha is actually closer to a Middle Eastern document, but it's used by Vedic astrologers. And so I got introduced to a lot of these techniques, which were essentially a little bit of Chandra Kalanadi is a classical text. It's just extremely disorganized. So it includes principles of Nadi astrology. And I can remember saying to one of my students back around 2000, I was saying, I wonder if I could take the beginning of a Mahadasha and figure out how the Mahadasha was going to be by picking the beginning date of the Mahadasha. So essentially the birth of the Mahadasha.
Oh, absolutely. I do that.
Yeah. And,
absolutely. Yeah. That's a good method.
Yeah. And then about maybe about 1 year after I did that, I saw this book by Dr. Patel or by C.S. Patel, and he said, you can find out how a dasha is going to manifest by taking the planetary positions of the star of the Mahadasha. Right. So a lot of those things, I don't know whether I read it and forgot I read it, or Yeah,
I know.
or it's just something. I have a relatively strong Mars, a relatively strong Mercury, and a very strong Venus and Jupiter. So so my logic, it tends to be it's very straightforward. It doesn't mean I'm perfect, but I can figure the if you, essentially if you give me a couple of lessons, I can figure out more advanced principles later on. It doesn't mean I have to stop I should stop studying, but I can figure out if you start me I can figure out where there is pretty quickly.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Fabulous.
Yeah,
I have,
and you and I share a similar beginning because the first book I read was an autobiography of yoga. Yeah,
that book has so
And I'm
much
a Kriya,
spiritual power.
yeah, and I'm a Kriya Yoga Swami.
Yes,
Yeah,
fantastic. I studied Kriyas for 3 years, and it was so time consuming, but
yep,
3 hours of Kriyas and meditations a day.
yeah,
And I sustained it for 3 years, but then it became a little bit too much. And
yep, yeah,
then I met Dr. Pillai, so I felt there was no need for the Kriyas
yeah.
anymore.
Oh no, and the thing of it is there is an adage that if you pick one path, you should figure out how to yoke other paths to it. Not, so because essentially, the analogy I like to use is if I'm going to, let's say if I'm going to New York City and I decide to go by car, then I decide to go by plane, then I decide to go by train. I end up starting all over again. I might as well just go by car the way that I start out doing, and just get there that way.
I believe
Because
that's super intelligent, not getting stuck ever and being very flowing. And Dr. Pillai does that all the time. He
yeah,
says, just because I have a ticket to go to New York today, that doesn't mean I will go.
yeah,
Um, and so he's guided all the time. And you mentioned Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. He was one of his teachers.
oh, okay,
Being a Siddha, he was trained by Siddhas, but he also was a student and did some work for Maharishi Mahesh Yogi.
yeah.
Uh, I don't know in what years, way back,
Yeah,
back in the day.
I won't say too little credit is given to Maharshi, but basically a lot of people started their spiritual path under him. He was a door opener, so even if you didn't end up staying with him, he opened the doors for so many people. Like Dr. Chopra, obviously, is maybe the best known example. But
Yeah.
uh, but but yeah, but just that ability to come in and
And teaching
and so did Yogananda, and Shivananda, all those gurus. So yeah, so that's about the story. My parents weren't well known. My father was popular, but not well known. Uh, and my father was a liquor salesman. I have a Saturday check-in. My father was a liquor salesman. My
where are
mother
you
came.
from originally?
He's Portuguese, or well, he was
Oh,
Portuguese but born in America. And
oh,
my mother was a war bride from England,
wow.
from Liverpool, as a matter of fact. So I had an advantage when the Beatles were around. Uh,
You were, so your parents were foreigners, in other words.
well, not really. My dad was born here. My grandfather was a foreigner. But my dad was born in the United States, but he could speak around 2 or 3 different languages.
Yeah, we all do in, well, I studied foreign languages at
Yeah,
university. So that I always had a passion for foreign cultures, and
yeah,
I studied like overall 9 to 10 languages. I
yeah,
don't speak almost any of them, but you know how we start when you're children, a child. My mother taught me Latin when I was 9 years old. So she was very particular with languages.
yeah, yeah.
And then I learned classical Greek. That was my second. And third was English when I was 5, actually. So that was my first foreign language, obviously. And I loved English. So I didn't know how useful it would come, how useful it would be one day. Yeah.
Well, that's something else we have kind of a bond with, and that is I went to a Catholic high school. I was taught by Jesuits in my high school.
Oh,
which is actually pretty rare for the part of the, not rare for Boston, but rare for the city I grew up in, which is a relatively poor city. So they started a Jesuit high school in my hometown.
wow. It's a school for leaders.
Yeah, so
With
so, so
Jesuits,
they,
I find every president, every top person in
yeah,
Italy always.
yeah, yeah. So the Jesuits essentially taught us to question everything. That was the gift of the Jesuits. And I was actually raised Church of England because of my father, because my father was Catholic and my mother was Anglican. So I was raised Episcopalian.
Oh,
So I was raised Episcopalian, went to a Catholic high school, and now I'm a Hindu.
I see. Yeah.
So
So yeah, it's definitely it's good to be exposed to a lot of
yeah,
things. When I was little, except for my grandma, nobody was religious, and I taught myself, all the prayers. When I visited my grandma, I read their books, and then I read the Gospels, and I believed in. I mean, to me, they were real. I talked to
yeah,
Jesus, angels. It was normal for me when I was a
yeah,
child, little, like 5, 6, 7. And then I got lost. And then, like around 20, I returned more to spirituality. Yeah. But in 1993 was the turning point. So I
yeah,
quit PR, then I quit my job in PR and I became a yoga teacher in 2004.
yeah.
Yeah, after I took my certifications, and that's it. I never looked back. I never regretted it. I quit
Excellent,
most organizations I was working for. I was helping nonprofits sometimes, a couple of
excellent.
nonprofits, and that's it. Never again. Not that I don't believe in that work, but I was so focused on my spiritual path.
Oh no, and I just retired. Excuse me, I just retired from the government around 3 years ago. So I worked in employment and training. Then I worked in education and so I was essentially I was in not identical to Mr. L. Mr. L. But Mr. L was a government employee for many years. Cameron was a government employee for many years, and he
Oh,
and he retired. But he worked he was the audit. He was like something like one of the chief auditors for the government of India. But I worked in education. I worked in career and technical education. So so so, so there's sort of a parallel, So it's like a lower status job than Mr. Rao's job would be. That was my background.
now KRL worked for the government. Or
Yeah,
the
yeah,
military.
yeah, yeah. He was doing horoscopes part time, free of charge, for anybody who needed a horoscope done. That was when he was in India. When he came over here, he charged. But but
The
but
kind of
yeah. But there are expenses involved in coming to America. It's not. Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah,
So ideally, no, I wouldn't charge anything. But I live here.
yeah.
Everything I buy is expensive. Everything that we do is so expensive.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean that's.
Mostly plants. You wouldn't know.
Oh, oh, oh,
Eating vegan, vegetarian, pure
yeah,
food has become like a luxury, and
yep,
I'm so grateful I can do it. But my heart goes to so many people who can't do that, and they have to eat cheap, like
yep,
junk food because it doesn't cost anything.
yep.
So yeah, that's a long story. So let me ask you a little bit. You are associated with Kepler College. It's
Yes,
an astrology university, isn't it?
yes, yep.
Can you tell us a little bit about it? I'd like to know.
Kepler was founded around 2000, somewhere between 2000 and 2003. And the school the school is actually founded as a 4-year university. That was its major. And they included Vedic. Dennis Harness was once a member of the faculty, Dr. Dennis Harness.
That's it.
And I took over for Dennis at one point. and then Ken Miller. Essentially, I got too busy with my graduate work and with other responsibilities. I don't think Ken took over for me. Essentially, he started teaching the Vedic astrology courses, but I was teaching Vedic astrology there for about, I say, for about 3 to 4 years. But basically, Kepler was founded. It was founded by people like Robert Hand and Lee Lehman, who are well-known people in the Western astrological community, and Dennis Harness is a well-known person in the Vedic astrology community. And Kepler's original idea was to get certified as a full degree granting 4-year university eligible for student aid. That didn't work. So Kepler transformed itself into essentially what I would call a vocational college. So they were trying to prepare themselves as a 4-year academic college.
Like
Yeah, and
Vedic,
yeah,
not.
yeah, and that process, especially in the United States, I don't know. I'm sure it's intensive in other countries as well, but especially in the United States, is number one, very time and credential intensive, and number two, extremely expensive. So, a lot of problems with Kepler's initial efforts to get accredited actually boiled down to money. But they're trying it again. They reorganized themselves. They made the classes tighter and more user friendly in terms of the amount of money. And so they have a new chairman of the board, and they're still forging ahead. So they still have Vedic classes there. They still have Western. They still have Hellenistic Greek classes there. So it's essentially the entire spectrum of astrology that they teach there.
Gary, don't you think that's because there's no legislation in the US for such things? For example, in India, the Vedic astrology is a science because the Supreme Court ruled it.
Yeah.
And also the University Grants Commission, has taken Vedic astrology seriously. You can get a PhD now in Vedic astrology. And that's pretty amazing. I think something comparable doesn't exist anywhere else, right? As far as,
and there have been astrology schools approved in the past, but they were approved based upon the fact that they were essentially treated like religious institutions. In the United States, they were treated like religious institutions.
Well, there's a lot of education that.
Yes. So
that's why I'm very excited that we're doing this to tell people more what Vedic astrology is and how it helps. It's really incredibly helpful across the board, I find. And it doesn't matter the background or the problem itself. It can be a financial problem or even a psychological loss, and it can be a relationship problem. Most people seem to have that. Definitely the relationship problem is there. And then sometimes just a lack of direction, getting stuck somewhere, which is very common for everybody, right? We all get there sometimes, at least I do. Sometimes I need to tweak here and there. So I want to feel fresh and not getting stuck in anything. Of course, I am committed. It takes a commitment.
Oh yes, of course.
Can't be Vedic astrologer on the weekend. I don't think that's possible.
And I think the key towards getting it more recognized, there is a bias definitely in the West against astrology, because essentially Western universities used to teach astrology up until maybe around 200 years ago. It was actually a course of study. And it was all kicked out when the Enlightenment started kicking his heels up and saying, "Oh, that's not legitimate. You can study astronomy, but saying there's any meaning behind what the stars do or what the planets do in the sky, that's just silliness." So essentially, we gained something with the age of reason, and we lost something with the age of reason. Everything became mechanistic.
Yes, and that's very sad, I find, and I don't think that way. I never have, and I know Aristotle even said that at the time we have lost the capacity to read planets and to understand them. So let's give up on astrology,
Yep,
and that's the only reason, because he felt people didn't get it anymore.
yep,
But that things have changed, and there are a lot of spiritual people who understand the need,
sure,
because
sure.
we become very fatalistic and very materialistic, and we forget the world of infinite possibilities. That's what I learned from my teachers. Never get stuck, and never say this is impossible.
Yeah. Yeah,
So keep reading
and
that.
I think that's the key, because there is a certain amount of prejudice to overcome to the world as a whole in the study of astrology, but I think you're starting to see more and more people, so I'm sure you have clients who are lawyers and businessmen, and I've had,
Entrepreneurs, a lot of
yeah,
women entrepreneurs. Yeah.
yeah, and I've had people who have doctoral degrees from other countries who come to see me for astrology readings, and also people who have doctoral degrees in this country come to see me for readings. So it doesn't mean that people who are intellectually um, intellectually advanced don't accept the validity of it. It's more of an institutional thing. It's more of an institutional acceptance, and
Yeah,
those are the toughest to move, but they can be moved.
maybe one day when
Yeah,
everybody's ready.
yeah.
I
Oh
believe
yeah,
it. Also, I think Americans are definitely avant-garde in so many ways, and there are a lot of spiritual people in the U.S. In Italy, more I find that more people understand astrology because it's a more ancient culture,
yep,
and all ancient cultures have Persian astrology.
yep.
Like, that's also fascinating. There's a lot around the world that people understand. Yeah, in
Well,
Europe, way more followed, including by financial institutions. I understand. I don't want to name names, but yeah.
the U.S. is what, maybe 300 years old, actually more like 250 years old. So and you have countries in Europe and the Middle East, and India, of course, which are like at least between 4,000 and 6,000 years old. The cultures are at least that old. So I think that's, so we're a comparative. We're not a stupid country, but we're a comparatively young country.
I
Yeah,
believe that a lot of people are ready for that. It's just
yeah,
a matter again of
yep,
legislation,
yep,
an academy. I find it's an academic problem
yep.
more than anything else. Yeah.
Oh yeah, most definitely. And there has been some progress made in that area through the years. Certain of the studies that have come out, which were intended to disprove astrology, have actually proved there is a correlation between the astrological events and worldly events. Uh,
Absolutely.
so 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 the French brothers, I can't remember their names, but essentially that study came out. It was intended to disprove astrology, and then they found a correlation between Mars and the lives of
All
generals.
the same. They all start out by saying it's all, superstition, and then they are stunned. Most people who actually look deeper into it, and there are a lot of teachers who don't know anything. They love just to say it a priori, but then if they even took the time to look into it, they would realize. And yeah, definitely the world is ready. And Dr. Pillai made this prediction like way back in 2010, I think, or even earlier, that Vedic astrology will become very big.
Yep.
It will only grow. And he said, but it more like Vedic astrology, because Western astrology is in a state of confusion. I don't know why he said that. I've never looked very deep into Western astrology. I studied it a little bit, but
Well,
then moved on to.
yeah, and I'm not going to criticize Western astrology. I have a, I have a lot of good friends who are Western astrologers, and who basically know what they're doing.
Yeah, yeah, they're
Yeah, but
very educated.
but but it is what I would call is a little bit of a broken tradition, and what I mean by that is essentially there was a gap where it wasn't studied hardly anybody at all. And then it was rejuvenated around the turn of the 20th century by people like C.E.O. Carter and Alan Leo. At least in a formal way.
I saw something on
Yeah, yeah.
I used to follow actually that kind of, but I saw that what destroyed Western astrology, I believe, this is my opinion, that is that they removed the dashas, they removed the nakshatras, and then they added some Rahu and Ketu fixing here and there. But then I find that it has lost a lot from Greek astrology, which was from the, I believe, from the Vedic background, and then they just modernized it and took out a lot of things.
Well,
so once you keep cutting, then finally you're
yeah, and the framework is a little bit. Again, there are some people who follow very strict frameworks, but unless you have a solid structure, so let's say unless you have a solid foundation, you're not going to build anything. So Vedic has a very solid foundation. Western has a foundation, but it's more loosely interpreted by a lot of people. And so that doesn't mean that Western astrology has no rules. Quite the contrary.
Yeah, it does work, especially with intuition and good preparation. It definitely can work, but it didn't work for me. So no hard feelings. I'm sure I respect all.
We move on to something else. We move on to something else.
The only thing I want to say about both Vedic astrology and Western astrology is that entertainment, the kind of astrology, has ruined a lot, given astrology a bad name. Like even if you look on Instagram nowadays, you see the signs that will kill you in a heartbeat. And
yeah, I know.
That.
Oh no, it's silliness.
And Aquarius, like, where is that coming from?
Yeah.
Clothes for Aries and Virgo and whatever, and it's like it doesn't make any sense. But they have like hundreds of thousands of people watching these things, reading and liking them.
And I think, well, and again, that's sun sign astrology has essentially, it's interested a lot of people in astrology because they can tag themselves with this label. They can say,
it's easy.
I'm a Scorpio, you better not mess with me, or something like that. Or I'm a Pisces, you'll have to forgive me if I forgot what your name is. It's just, and that may be true to a certain extent, but there are so many other factors that go into interpreting a chart, even in Western astrology as well. So those characteristics, it drives me bonkers when I see them even in Vedic astrology discussions where they say, "Well, I have such and such in this sign in this house. What will that do?" And it's like,
and then
okay, what's the rest of your chart like? You can't just say this will happen because yeah. So I think that's the flaw. People want to take shortcuts. They want to get quick, easy answers, and neither system really favors easy answers. Even if you look at Western astrology, it's a psychological tool. It's a process tool.
Yes, process, and then you have to know how to put it together. But really, dedicating yourself 100%, it can be done. And astrology for those who want to learn it. But it takes a lot of education, especially for the mentality about it. Like, for example, the other day I was helping a person, this person, a very lovely lady who has a husband who was looking for a job. And she just got her first job for, not too long ago. So I said, it's her birthday. So I said, I will help your husband. And I gave her that as a birthday gift to her. She was my client. So, and after every other thing, he said, but what do you mean my moon is in Leo? I'm a Cancer. And then I said, what? And then the ascendant was Taurus. I don't remember, something totally different. And he kept saying, no, I'm a Cancer. I know for sure. And he said, hello. So it took a long time just make him come around and see, look, we're not talking about the same thing. You
Yep.
may be born during that time of the year, but it's a different system that doesn't have anything to do with that. So
Yep.
I find that happens a lot.
Yep. Yep.
What about you? Do you have the same?
I do not as much because I actually, to be honest with you, I don't have. I very rarely get people who had astrology readings, Western astrology readings get done.
Mhm.
My clientele is more, so I do have to reorient themselves, reorient some people to it, and I'll explain to them the differences between the zodiacs before. It's like about a 5 to 10 minute spiel I go into before I even do the reading, where I explain this
Yeah.
is how the system is set up. This doesn't mean that you're not,
Libra.
whatever sign you are in Western astrology. It just means that this adjusts to a certain position in the sky,
Mhm.
and usually people can understand that. They can usually grasp that. It's not that much of a leap, but I find myself, I need to provide that preamble unless
Well, maybe we'll start
unless
doing.
the person's already had a Vedic chart.
Maybe you're right. I think that's how I'll think about that. I think it's a good idea to explain for 2 or 3 minutes
Yeah,
what to expect and not to go there. So we're
yeah,
not midway that I've been
yeah.
telling you things and you're asking all these questions and you say, wait a minute, but I'm not Leo. I'm a Cancer. So okay, so that,
People identify with their labels, don't they?
yes, it's easier.
So this form that we're in is essentially a label. We identify with this form. This form doesn't last, right?
Try not to. I don't think
Yeah.
I am a Vedic astrologer. I think I am a divine being in training at least,
Yep.
and
Yep.
made God made us in his
Yeah.
own image
Yeah. But
or her own image, both. Like,
yeah. Yeah. Oh, I'm not saying you personally, but I'm saying we as a general term. I'm not saying you
yes,
personally.
I know you're talking in general, but I like
Yeah.
to talk about that because people give themselves some label. I am so and so. I'm this age, this gender, and this job. I do this job, but this is what I've studied. Yes,
Yeah.
that's all lovely, but
Yeah.
there's so much more, right?
Yeah. And again, if we're talking about infinite possibilities, you could decide. Even at my age, I'm 68. Even at my age, I could decide to go off and do an entirely new career if I wanted to, or do nothing. You know,
Short as
it doesn't mean that just because you've done certain things, you're always going to do them. Now, there's an analogy they use that essentially
Mhm.
it's easier to turn a ship before it hits an island than like within 10 feet of an island. Okay. So essentially, if you start changing your direction early on, that's easier than all of a sudden you see an iceberg and say, whoops, hey, you're going to crash in the iceberg. You may minimize the damage, but you still can change. You still can change direction until, at least as long as you're cognizant of it before the event occurs. And that's the pattern of karma. Karma is not some karmas are fixed. So certain conditions that I enter the world in, like my parents, my background, the household I was born into, the household you were born into, those are fixed karmas.
That's a fixed karma, but everything else,
Yeah,
5%
yeah,
genetic
yep,
and the genetics, and then everything else is up to our
yeah,
consciousness.
yep, yep. So
Alton says also, like for example, that he is able to change somebody. He can make somebody who is a millionaire a billionaire, but he cannot make somebody who makes $100,000 become a millionaire. That's because we all get compartmentalized,
yep,
and you get stuck in with that mindset, and we all do that more or less, right? So I try to watch for that and not getting
yep,
stuck
yep,
too
yep,
much. I don't identify myself with too much. Even with
yep.
my studies, I never feel I'm just a beginner. To me, I'm always a beginner.
Oh sure, oh sure. And I think those are the most valuable kinds of people to be with. If you with somebody who thinks they know everything,
Oh
then
boy.
then you're going to be stuck. It's really, so that person isn't evolving themselves. How are they going to help you evolve? So it's a tricky task. It's tricky because you learn so much and you say, and then you say, but I have to learn this too. Okay, so back to the drawing board again.
That's a good point. Gary, that Dr. Charak, one of my teachers, I've taken seminars with him, maybe like 4 or 5, I don't remember, but it was always wonderful, like over a weekend, etc. So I learned from him too. There's one thing he said, no, I don't even show my birth chart. I don't even tell my age. I guess that's the same we're saying. He doesn't want to be identified. Oh, he's the Dr. Charak whose ascendant is this and etc. It just doesn't want to go there. So it doesn't want labels. It doesn't want prejudice. And he's
Yep,
the most amazing man. He's done 5,000 plus surgeries for the poor.
sure.
He's an amazing surgeon and also a great humanitarian. And I just love that he's always like fresh, right? Dr.
Right.
Phil says he feels he's a 16-year-old and he's 70
Yep.
now, 71 maybe. So yeah, that's amazing.
Oh no, he's a terrific guy. Now, I think this has been fascinating, but we don't want to burn out our audience too much.
Yes.
So let's
May I
yeah,
ask you one more question before we
sure,
go on, so I
sure.
don't forget? I meant to ask you about cartography. I'm fascinated by that. And so, how do you make for people who are never studied Vedic astrology a simple way how they can look it up themselves? Is there a
Well,
way?
essentially, a lot of Vedic astrology programs actually come with it built in. But the AstroCard, I'm going to share the screen if you don't mind. I'll show you. I'll just show you a chart. So this comes built in as a feature in Sri Jyoti Star, but I think certain other programs have it as well. And this is, I won't tell you whose chart this is. Let's pretend it's nobody we know. Uh, okay, all right, all right. So essentially, okay, all right. So this is an astrocartography chart. Now, astrocartography is a relatively recent invention. And essentially, what to explain it just in very general terms, is essentially where the lines of the planets intersect on the Earth. Okay, that's basically what it is. So and you'll see the sun is over here, over Arizona and Texas,
Mhm.
uh, and you'll see a Mercury line over here as well. There's a Venus line over here, over in Pennsylvania. And there's a Sun, Mercury, Saturn line, and there's a Venus line right over England, okay, England, France, and Spain. And you'll see a Rahu line in Italy. You'll see. Well, again, that means the person will be well known in Italy. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. That person may be a movie star in Italy. Who knows?
Yes.
But and you'll also see another line going through here, which I can't identify right now, going right through Turkey. And there's a moon line going through the Middle East. Okay, so all those lines mean something. They correspond to certain planets and houses in the chart. So let's say, so we both know there are good and bad planets for different rising signs in Indian astrology. So sometimes things like a Saturn line, which you would say, oh, I want to stay away from my Saturn line, that's horrible. Sometimes for certain rising signs, that's actually quite good.
Right?
It'll provide a great benefit to them.
Yes.
A Jupiter line can produce enemies for them. They'll have insatiable desires if Jupiter's too strong. So so and the same is true of Venus. So for some rising signs, Venus is
I
actually
think
a bad
Venus
line.
is lethal. Yeah.
Yeah, yep. So Venus won't produce, it won't produce romance. It'll produce
Other things,
drug
like
addiction or other problems.
Right, faint maybe, but not.
Yeah, yeah. So, so essentially, if you're looking at the astrocartography lines, you can essentially tell where the person's going to have good fortune or bad fortune based upon certain events. And of course, it all depends on where they're going. So Rahu lines right now, because we're approaching eclipse, Rahu lines become extremely important. Okay, because Rahu lines are stand-ins and we can talk about the eclipses next weekend. We'll be meeting after the lunar eclipse before the solar, and and basically, if you have those lines in those particular countries, it'll actually this is a Rahu line through Turkey. I'm sorry, this is a Rahu line, an ascendant Rahu line through Turkey, and so you'll have all these particular combinations for planets. Some planets may be quote unquote death inflicting. There'll be some planets will point towards spiritual liberation. Some planets will point towards other things. So at some planets might point towards marriage. And planets like Rahu can even point towards marriage as well, depending on the chart.
Yeah. Ketu and Rahu, definitely.
Yeah. So essentially, all these particular lines will mean something in terms of the person's individual chart. Some will be good places for them to settle down, others will be bad places for them to settle down or to visit. Or they can expect, they won't necessarily be bad, but they can expect certain problems if they go there. Okay, so essentially, if you have a knowledge of where these favorable lines or unfavorable lines are, you can plan things like, let's say your chart and your livelihood calls for you to actually travel somewhere else for work or for some other mission in life. You can find out whether or not that's a good place for you to go, or whether you'll have a lot of misfortune if you go there. And you can try to minimize the misfortune through pujas or yagas or whatever kind of device you want to use. And you can try to increase the fortune. So let's say the person wants to be, this chart isn't the chart of a billionaire's chart, but let's say this person wants to become a billionaire. Then you'd want to look at where the 11th house lord was and the second house lord was, and put that person right where those lines intersected. Just something like that. So essentially, and you might find out whether or not the chart indicates a foreign wife or a domestic wife or a domestic career.
Just so I understand. So you're also saying that it's connected with karma, and some karmas can fructify in some countries and not so much in others.
That's right. That's
what the seed does also.
Yeah, or it'll be a little bit easier to make the karma fructify in some places than others.
That should, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, I've heard that a lot. And also Dr. Pillai says that he would have diabetes in India, but not in the US. And
yep.
He had to take some karma before he was conscious, of course.
Yeah, but I think this is a useful tool because I've been able to look at world events. I've been able to look at charts and to essentially take the charts as a question chart, like a question chart. So this is in classical. Mundane astrology, like you'd find in the Brihadsangita. Although I do take some tips from the Brihadsangita, like there, as you probably know, there are many Ketus. There are many types of Ketus in the Brihadsangita.
I cannot even tell you which is which.
Yeah. Well, the Brihadsangita has essentially, there's a double-tailed comet, which is a certain kind of Ketu. So whenever you see a comet coming or some kind of unknown object in the sky, that's a Ketu. Okay, and there are double-tailed comets, which are Ketus, and I think there was one comet that occurred in December of 2019, and if you want, and if you want to look at what caused the COVID outbreak, essentially you could trace it back to that particular comment.
Yeah, that makes sense. And also Jupiter, believe it or not, we
Yeah.
came.
Oh yeah. Oh no. Oh no. Oh no.
The
Oh no. Oh
eclipse.
no.
It's
Most.
incredible how everything is correlated. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Most definitely. And this is part of the problem, I think, when you start dealing in dogma about astrology, because there are natural benefics and there are temporal benefics in Vedic astrology, which we both know. That's a pretty basic concept.
It's
Yeah, yeah,
If somebody doesn't know that, they will say it's a benefic and that's
yeah,
it.
yeah.
But
So,
in this chart, it's not, it's a Badaka, it's a very
yeah,
bad planet. And,
yeah. So,
uh,
so,
yeah.
so, so Jupiter, Venus can be like, they can make you feel great, but you'll get nothing done. Or else you'll start drinking a lot because you say, I can do that tomorrow. It's just it's just something I don't have to worry about.
Mine Venus is more like that. I get very lazy on Fridays, and that's not me. I have a lot of energy. I'm always doing 100 things.
Yeah.
I multitask even, but on a Friday, I'm like, oh, do I have to do this? It works like that for me.
Yep. So, but the benefics, and it's interesting because sometimes you have to tell a client that sometimes a benefic planet, it'll make things easier. That's one thing a benefic planet will do. It'll make things easier. It won't necessarily make you more productive.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay.
That's true.
Sometimes you need the malefics to give you a kick.
Yes, so you suffer more, but you become great because of
Yeah.
your. It's the hero journey, right?
Right. Right.
You
Right.
have to rise up to the occasion.
Right. So sometimes you need Saturn to say, okay, you're going to have to get your work done. You may not like it. You may want to go and do something fun, but you have to get your work done.
Saturday is amazing. Like some Saturdays, I love it so much. So I find that you know what you said before. See, what's the chart on the at the start of a Mahadasha. There's also a simpler method I use, which I learned from the Siddhas, from Dr. Pillai primarily, and I have also a book I like to consult. But I find that if you look at how things are going at the beginning of something, whether it's your new Mahadasha, or it's birthday, or it's a certain day of the week, and just notice how things are going. You're just starting a new project. You're having a lot of troubles. So chances are that you're missing something, because the
Yep.
beginning of something will show the end of it.
Yep.
And show the results. So that's an easy way everybody can use. Even if you don't know astrology, just notice at the beginning of, like at the beginning of your marriage, are you having a lot of pleasant episodes, or the other way around? So pay
Yep.
attention.
Yep. I, I and I,
Everything
and
can
I
be,
yeah,
yeah.
I completely agree. So I think that's why so so well begun is half done, I think, was the term that I heard used a lot. So essentially that's why it's important to pick a good muhurta or a good election for any activity. Some people dwell on it a little bit too much, but I think if the environment is I've started jobs that have started. I mean, the Mahadashas themselves look awful, but the jobs have turned out well, and it doesn't mean that and I managed to actually start the job, and the job has actually started off well. But the Mahadashas, when I looked at the Mahadashas, I go like, ooh, you're going to start a job doing that? Mahadasha and Bhukti? Ooh, are you serious? And but the work has turned out well, and that's because of the events happening at the time I started the job.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So everything has its own birth, life, and death.
Yes. And the beauty of Vedic astrology is that there are so many remedies. What
Yep.
are your favorite remedies? And then we probably need to wrap it up. So
Yeah.
otherwise we get no views.
Yeah.
If
I,
we have 2 hours,
I,
I want people to be able to see this and
I,
say, okay, I'll see this tomorrow, or no,
yeah,
it's too long.
uh, I think my favorite remedies are really. I like mantras. I really love mantras. So let's say if I'm having a problem with Venus, I'll do a Parasharama mantra, or if I'm having a problem with Jupiter, I like the avatars who Vishnu has mantras. I really like. So Narasima for Mars.
Oh, yeah.
Those are my personal favorites because they actually tell me a lot about how the planet acts in the chart too. It's something that I sort of link onto, and also I do like to do things at um, I do like to do things at good times, like start on good days, and also see if I can find the positive in a situation, see if I can find um, suit myself to the actual task at hand.
And before we started this video, just to give a little background, we were supposed to start during the Rahu Kala, and we said, no, 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 we're not going to do that. So we started a bit later. So just we could miss that. So yeah, definitely it's a good idea to look at the Muhurta and all the Panchang, and definitely that's a remedy in itself. And of course, mantras are fundamental. Without mantras, there's I mean, most of the remedial aspect is really mantras, and also, of course, you can do a yagna. It's called a fire ritual or homan in South India, and those are very powerful. They're really life changing, and they need to be done by somebody who specialized. I was trained by but Dr. Pillai empowered me to to do fire rituals, but they're kind of modified for a Western person who wasn't born a Brahmin. So yeah, in a simplified but correct, authentic way. So I can do, but I don't do them for my clients, but I have performed them for.
You're probably born a Brahmin in your chart.
Yeah, actually, I do have a lot of Brahmin planets all taking key positions. Yeah. Also, I have Mercury and Jupiter exchanging like a Mahaparivartana from 10th and 4th house,
So yeah,
7th and 10th. So there's a lot of Jupiter and Mercury in my chart. Yeah,
yeah,
that's why I love writing it.
yeah.
So,
So yeah. So you have those combinations in your chart. Yeah. So you don't have to be born a Brahmin to become it. Yeah,
I do.
this may be blasphemous to somebody, but uh,
I
from
see.
everything that
Sorry.
from everything the priests have told me, you don't have to be born a Brahmin to be a Brahmin.
I think also lifestyle is important. I live like a secluded yogi most of the time, so
Yeah,
I barely go out. Like I need a lot of time to focus and study or do pujas, etc. So
yeah,
I don't. I'm not. I was never a party goer, but of course I had a social life.
yeah.
Sometimes you have to do that more, and you want to. All right. So it's been a pleasure, Gary. It's really, really lovely. How about, would you like to talk next time about like archetypes, the deities of
Sure.
Vedic astrology?
Yes, I'd be delighted to talk about that.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. I really enjoyed it.
Same
Talk
here, Lalitha. Thank you
to
very
you.
much.
See you soon. Bye.
Namaste.
Namaste.